Which do you hate the worst? The news. Passages. As the pages dropped and the hands turned, one man adopted this as his personal motto. No, I will not calm down. Not as long as I am still alive. A balancing act means most to those with nothing left to balance. There was once a flock of pigeons who were all partially dazed, but since it was the prevailing norm, none recognized their condition. Too much still left to balance. Peering at himself in the mirror, a man said, "You look like hell." And his reflection replied, "It's a good thing you can't see inside." Under standard conditions, a man's juggling act is hampered by him having an even number of balls. Thinking about being more conscious has interfered with more would-beers becoming so than any other single thing. Justice, injustice, and super-duper justice. You gotta love them all. One man lived in the land of narration and commentary, and it likewise in him. One of the strangest facts of all is how few people find any strangeness in the whole process. One man named his own toy train the "Where did it come from? Where is it going? And what are we all doing on board?" Automotive metaphysics. At the visual level, there seems to be two major branches of mystical thought. The ones that view man as a used car, and the one that sees him as still on the assembly line. Consumer transcendence. It's hard to sell someone something that's not yet finished. I'll never be mentally lonely, thought one man, as long as I have the world out there to listen to. Sales and proselytization. Those driven to share what they claim they know never have any comprehension of what they promote. If wolves could think, a sly one would conclude, never put your trust in anyone who asks for it. One man's personal defense against the ever-increasing, overwhelming onslaught of modern contemporary theories he expressed thusly. What do you mean, modern contemporary theories? Editor. An interest in things unprofitable proves nothing, save that you're human. And as a matter of fact, that your understanding of what is profitable is subject to later revision. As he strolled through the cemetery examining the headstones, a man pondered. If each man is so unique and individualistic, then why must they post his name even in death? Are we not all in showbiz? At the unattended level of consciousness, everyone's thinking is an oldies act, and a group one at that. To call those who believe in a personal God stupid or naive is to miss the point and misname them. Staggeringly egocentric is more like it. Definitions. Debate and argument. Strength enhancers for mechanical consciousness. Corollary entry. A definition that's not offensive is not worth presenting. The balancing act, second stanza. When he was away from home, one man would use an assumed name, and when he wasn't, he wouldn't admit it. Political correction. There is no such thing as the balance of power, only the power of balance. Conversation between two mental voices. Without memory, there is nothing. Yes, there is thought. Then, without attention, there is nothing. Certainly there is thought. Okay, then without specific intention, there is nothing. Au contraire, there still is thought. Then, scratching his head, the first voice said, "Then I don't get it. which is reasonable enough given the evidence revealed. Save your pen and paper. Everyone's biography has already been writ. Even to himself, a more conscious man doesn't take credit for any ability he may have, which does not require his constant attention. To a mystic, the supreme form of effort is attention. Of his several unique features, one of man stands in striking relief. He is the only creature who wants to change. Topology is spread out and all over. Consciousness is not limited to the head, but since it's the only part that can talk about it, ergo, its apparent supremacy and man's fascination therewith. If lions could think, the first thing that'd probably come to mind would be, where the hell did this come from? And how'd I get along without it up until now? On one world were machines programmed to disbelieve they were. Anytime you're about to be captured by the notion of man being somehow outside of nature, or worse yet, that man can overcome her, just look at the weeds springing up in the cracks of a fully paved sidewalk. Or better still, consider the continual stray thoughts that pop up in your own so-called private mind. As he searched for a mystical teacher right for him, a lad used as a guide his father's parting advice in the matter. A mystic with charts breaks young men's hearts. Business correction. The best approach to systems analysis is to have no system to analyze. One man says the worst thing about being ordinary is having to use the same words as everyone else. Vision. If you can't suspend thought, you'll never see. Something's going to entertain your mind. Either common life provided ideas or those you furnish. Which will it be? Everyone's stupid, at least in theory, which is all that's necessary. Life seems very complicated, as does the mystical way, but in fact they're both quite simple. Excuse me. The common collective consciousness of man knows no secrets. One man sometimes lived in a foreign country. He never actually left his homeland, but what I said is still true. One man mostly lived in another time zone, sometimes ahead of his, sometimes behind, but never much in his own. A secret is not a true secret if it can ever be verbalized. The descriptions of the path change, but never the path itself. If there was ever a true single-minded effort, the struggle to awaken is surely it. In fact, nothing less will accomplish it. Common amongst the ordinary is the belief that, as regards man's problems, to get anywhere, we must retreat. One man said he preferred pets over children because he didn't have to babysit them, which he says is the same reason he dislikes his ordinary state of consciousness. Is there one clear line that distinguishes a mystic from everyone else? Yes. He doesn't care at all what's taking place in life compared to what's taking place inside of him. Let's look at it simply. If you're not in a state of attended consciousness, you're not really conscious. An alive, alert mystic is sweaty, hungry, and horny, and not propped up by thought. In this peculiar pursuit, the effort is the achievement. A conscious man has no biography or history. The beauty of the metaphors detailing human experience pale in light of its direct perception. Levels of ineptitude. I dance because I cannot paint. I paint because I cannot sing. I sing because I cannot speak, and I speak because I cannot write, and I write because I cannot bring my thoughts into clear, precise focus. First comes consciousness, breathed first to life by thoughts, then words, then mental pictures, then dreams, myths, and metaphors. Then beyond that, for a few, consciousness again. Fresh, unused, unspoken, undreamed of, unthinking consciousness. A simple, direct view is that. You live, then you die. Anything in addition to that is just you thinking about it. And oh yeah, well, I'm thinking about it. According to one vicious legend, the name of the very first and very best mystical school was, and I'm quoting, well, there it is. And that's that. Back again to the cloud. There's another aspect about such ideas as that, by me encouraging you, if at all interested, not to take it simply metaphorically. The difference in this sort of thing having some reality and it being a dream is strange, which is not the point I was going to get to tonight, but here we are anyway. Notice all forms of religion, mysticism, anything considered to be out of the ordinary. Notice, when it begins to reach levels of real popularity, when it begins to have any longevity, when it has proven itself to have any legs and be legit, they all have one thing in common. They're impossible to prove. They're impossible to even see. There is a certain area for variation within what I just said. But you do think about it. With most people, their idea of the spiritual, the religious, the mystical at all would be some idea of a supreme power, a God. And so there you are, if you want to take that as being the supreme, the extreme, normal mental concept of what would be something extraordinary would be truly the creator, the creative force, God, etc. And if there's any one thing that you're not going to see, all right, shouldn't try and discourage you. If there's any one thing that no one has seen, it's this. But notice how popular it is. It's popular among people who don't even believe in it. It's popular everywhere. Then it sort of decreases a bit, but you're still left, if someone pops up at any particular time and place and say that they have a new take on the great mystical path, or that they have straightened out some previous kind of mystical effort, and they give you new charts, new diagrams, new words. If it becomes popular at all, you're again left with it being, by and large, impossible to prove, and I don't mean in some scientific sense, but impossible to see. You're left with the charisma, you're left with the overbearing alpha wolf dominance of the guy trying to run the group, and you take his word for it. No one likes to use that term. Faith sounds a lot better, but even faith is becoming somewhat shoddy in its overuse. But you're left with the fact that the man says that he has this important information, or he draws out diagrams and etc. But you can never actually directly see it. Because if you could, for one thing, you would not be a submissive wolf. You would not be there listening to someone. But the only little point I was about to make is, as strange as this may sound about this thinking cloud, and it being the source of all human thought. Now, on the surface, I guess if I'd heard that from somewhere else, I'd thought, God damn, what kind of crackpot. But I'm going to have to ease off since I thought of it. The thing is, although you cannot see the cloud, and I knew that in advance, I knew that none of you could see it, because if you had, as soon as I started to describe it, somebody would stop and go, aha. So it is not visible, but without any doubt, every manifestation of it, every ramification of it, is right in front of your face, which is why it's sometimes I take the time to point out, and it's been pointed out before, that that which is considered to be extraordinary or mystical and it's publicly known is never it. Because what is it is so blunt and common that most people could not see it if it was pointed out, and most of those who've ever seen it never took the trouble to point it out, or they tried it once or twice. And it's like they told people and said, I finally realized after all these years, that's the ground. And everybody goes, and they wait for the metaphor, they wait for the mystical. And maybe the guy tries, well, all right. Rocks are laying there, right there on the ground. And that's about it. And so the guy wanders off, and you never hear of him unless he had a brother trying to make a living out of it, and then he changes his name from Bubba to Buddha, or from Jose to Jesus. They do something. But what I was trying to get at, as strange as it may sound about this sinking cloud, the son of a bitch is right there in front of you. You breathe it. Everything that I've described and what you probably have already put together after the last few days yourself, that's true mysticism. True mysticism is so plain, so blunt, so obvious, so in your face, you know the rest of it. That, ordinary people say, well, there it is. And they go, well, where? And you go, well, try the ground. They go, oh, okay. Okay, no. What does that represent? What is that a metaphor for? And God forbid you should say, well, actually nothing. But I thought maybe you was interested that that's the whole point. There it is. And it's not a metaphor for it. You can make it one. But if you just look, there it is. And that's the end of that. Back to the cloud. All right, well, another little thing I can't resist pointing out. Notice, you can do it in yourself, or you can notice those of you who've been around a while for me doing this, without a certain kind of peripheral occult trappings of some kind, without people believing that you're talking about something that they will never comprehend, that can never be seen. There's a built-in limiting factor as to the appeal of this sort of thing. If it just seems real blunt, just real common and plain, it just has almost no appeal whatsoever. Even with those who believe that they are quite serious students, seekers of some great mystical, secret, spiritual truth of some reality. Now back to the cloud. I wanted to tell you something else about the cloud. There are two aspects of it that are of pragmatic interest. One is, as I've already said, the cloud itself is the source. It is the origin of everything that humans have ever thought, and within routine limits, all that you're going to think. It is already there. The other aspect of it is that this cloud has a great magnetic energy to it. It has a seductive, well, it literally, I'll get into the poetic side in a second. It literally has a magnetic energy to it. And it is not all that dissimilar, although I wasn't looking for metaphors or similes, but these great cosmic nurseries of stars, these great cloud bursts that cosmologists and physicists are just beginning to try and put names on and measure and conclude as to what is their purpose, but they're beginning to suspect that they seem to be like the nurseries of newborn stars, and it's all these gaseous clouds. And it has anything that has that kind of mass, of course, has gravity and has a magnetic appeal. We are surrounded on this planet with this invisible cloud. It is the nursery of everything that humans think, and it also has this magnetic appeal to such a degree that it is almost impossible to peel yourself away from it And not just in a theoretical sense. With ordinary people, it is almost impossible, as impossible, to peel yourself away from it, to separate yourself from it, as it is for you to decide that you are getting tired of having to breathe on such a regular schedule. And that therefore that perhaps you're going to quit breathing, say from 2 until 4 in the afternoon, or maybe on Thursdays, or maybe you just decide that you do not speaking of pollution, but that you just do not care for the general atmosphere. For one thing, the hoi polloi and the common people are breathing it, and you decide that someone of your ilk deserves better, and perhaps you'll hold out until they can come up with a better grade of atmosphere. You have the same reasonable continued health possibility of doing that, continued survival, as an ordinary man would to decide, I will quit thinking what I've been thinking, or I'll quit thinking. It'd be hard for him to see it, but you know what I'm talking about by now. If he realized that all he thinks is what everyone else thinks. There's no such thing as private thoughts at that level, private ideas. So it'd be the same if a man could see it, for him to decide, well, even if he hadn't heard me say it, if he just decided, if he in some way began to suspect that everybody just thinks about the same, more or less, the same damn crap, just over and over, and they rechew it, and they change it around, and they call it this one season and something else next season. And an ordinary man, aspiring, I assume, to be some sort of creative intellect, could say, well, I'm tired of it. He could say that, but in the same way that a man could say, well, I'm tired of breathing. It's a waste of energy. Most of the time, just sitting there, I don't know why I have to breathe every 2 or 3 seconds. It would be the same kind of foolishness, and it would have the same possibility of success. Now, see, that sounds insane, but now we're back to real mysticism. You can test that. Anybody can test it that wants to. Anybody could hear that if they followed the sentence. It wasn't that complicated, or the 2 or 3 sentences. And a man could say, all right, I'll sit here and think of something that people don't normally think about. Well, I got time. Go ahead, try it. Of course, if he was truly ordinary, I assume that he would be able, since life protects the ordinary better than some others, that the man would be able to go, and then if I had the nerve to go, well, did you succeed? He'd go, well, sure. And what am I going to do? Say no? And really make us look good and say, well, I'm speaking for the rest of us. We know darn well you didn't do that. And he'd go, prove it. So there you are. But you should know on your own. The idea that you're going to think outside of what you normally think, the best shot a person can take. That's why that juggling act, for those of you that didn't care for the first page of tonight's news item, the last line, the reason that juggling acts do not work with ordinary people, and now by juggling acts you realize I'm referring to something trying to rearrange, trying to come up with some new sequence, progression, some new patterns in your thinking. The reason juggling acts won't work with ordinary people is they're hampered by the fact of only having an even number of balls. So if an ordinary person, if you told him that you are not capable of having ordinary, of private, personal, individual thoughts, he'd go, yeah, I am. The best he could come up with would be to take, if he had 2, 4, normally it's just 2 balls you're playing with, and one of them he keeps favoring. Let's see, he was thinking, well, I normally try to agree with people. I'll disagree with him. I'd normally vote Republican. I'll vote Democrat. I normally buy Time every week, but next week I'm going to buy the National Review. That's the best an ordinary person can do, is to take the coin and turn it over and go, well, I told you I could think on my own. I told you I could think outside the ordinary bounds, and that is absolutely the best they can do. That's the best anyone can do at that level. It is the source, it is the only cash, it is the only bank to which ordinary minds have to turn for any thought, which is why you can think without knowing what you're going to think, which is why you can speak without knowing what you're going to say next, why it all just happens. But the other aspect, it has a magnetic energy to it, and to get a little more poetic, it is seductive, which doesn't change the validity, which actually is a watering down of the bluntness of its magnetic energy. It holds you, but most people as we know now, do not like just a plain statement of, look, there's the ground. Oh, all right. Do you realize some of the components, do you realize that some of the world's greatest men have tried on the ground? A poem, dirt, and like that. But to make it a bit more poetic, put a semi-human face on it. For any semi-humans who may be tuned in. It has a seductive quality. And the quality of it is, this seductive quality, in a crude sense, as always the case, is known to humanity. But it is known in such an skewed manner. The quality is normally referred to almost entirely in a negative sense. And its most common label is sin. That when men are discussing why they should change, but the whole point of that we should do better, we should change, then it's always, whatever the religion, whatever the moral context, if it was outside, if it was just in a humanistic, moralistic context outside of some organized religion, it is always that there is some I don't mean to limit it to a singular, that there are some qualities, there are some activities, there are some interests, there are some endeavors, there are certain ideas, wishes, desires open to man, and that seem to be damn near natural to man, but are seductive in a non-productive fashion. But let's make it the easy way, it's normally lumped as sin. And notice that nothing on this planet, whether it be legal or moralistic, that only that which is desired is ever forbidden. Mm-hmm. And so sin, even though those engaged in making a living denouncing sin, seem loath, as is understandable, to put the bad mouth, or to give any of the good mouth to the enemy, to say that something is sinful and should be avoided, all you've got to do is have just a moment of lucidity and remember what I pointed out and understand that the only reason anything is forbidden is because men are inclined to do it. Sin is seductive. No matter which particular ones, it doesn't matter. It is seductive. And all the religions, even the civil aspect of civilization within the judicial system, all charge man with the duty of resisting uncivil, unhumane, inhumane, or unchristian, unjewish, etc. behavior. If the behavior was not seductive, they would not forbid it. Now, at the level of behavior, it is, once you see that also, it is very simplistic. At that level, the behavior is simply, even within religious context, is simply a civil attempt. It is a secular attempt to civilize man. It's to stop him from being a talking chimpanzee, to stop him from being a lion with an opposable thumb, or a wolf with a credit card. The behavior aspect is of just no interest to anyone who understands anything, because that would not be your problem, or you, speaking of you, theoretically, you would not be this far. That just your behavior is not the problem, and plus you should, once it's pointed out, you understand that a change of behavior is also not the answer. It's not the solution, because all of you, at some time or others, either quit smoking or drinking or beating up your wife or husband or shoplifting or doing something. And boy, did it change your life, right? Hey, grow up. What'd you expect? You have to get beyond the realm of behavior, which would be below the level of consciousness. We're talking about just behavior by its own definition as the activities of one's body. You have to get into the area of above the level of consciousness, or at the level of consciousness, and say that then what is being forbidden, what is called sinful, is seductive in a way that cannot be so directly attacked, such as a man, you can see him drinking and beating up his wife, and his neighbors, the priest, the rabbi, the whole social, the weight of his whole local neighborhood, the social weight of it can lay upon him, and they know whether he's still doing it. They know if he's trying to stop, or they can see him make some efforts or lack of effort. The whole thing is visible and out in the open, and the man cannot argue it. He cannot say that I've quit drinking when he's standing there with a bottle in his hand, or the mayor, and everyone says, well, we saw you last night drunk again. Anyone who's ever engaged in any kind of stimulant or depressant, caffeine, the alcohol, the nicotine, they know, if you enjoyed it and you partake of it, you know that it is seductive. It is enjoyable or you wouldn't do it. But when you get beyond the area of behavior and you try to talk to people about sin, the seductiveness of that which is non-physical, people usually wish, if they knew about it, wish they knew where to go join that flock of seagulls I told you that lived in a natural state of being partially dazed. Because they don't really want to hear this. It makes no sense. Plus, if you take it to heart, so to speak, and say, well, that's a good idea. I will quit wanting my neighbor's wife in my mind. Now, I've quit trying to screw my neighbor's wife. Because you remember the last couple of times I tried it. You know, one of the guys shot me in the leg. The guy that lives on my left. The guy 2 doors down sicked his dogs on me. So, you know, I've come to my senses. My behavior, I have altered my behavior in a profitable manner. I no longer seek out physically my neighbor's wife. So then someone says, yes, but if you want to make real progress, if you want to become truly individualistic, if you want to truly change what you are, to put a shock into your own nervous system to such a degree that you might affect what is commonly and laughingly referred to as one's individual personality, go above the level of behavior and stop trying to seduce your neighbor's wife mentally. And as soon as people hear that, now I'm just going to have to make up what they think. I don't really, but I thought, man. What they think is, oh, come, get out of here. That's more or less it. Of course, it could be translated into other languages according to where you were, but it's like, no, get out of here. Because, well, there's several reasons. One is they simply don't want to hear it because people cannot change and they do not want to be pressured. Because we're now to the area that brings it out. They also, nobody ever analyzes this, but if they heard it, and for any reason, they were wired up to where it just momentarily struck them as having an attractive sound to it. That, well, that would be something if I could affect my thinking. There is the unknown reality that that is more difficult, if not impossible, than it is for a drunk to quit drinking or a fat person to lose weight permanently. No one ever analyzes it this way. It's just they do not want to hear it. You cannot run a church on the basis of we're going to change our thinking. You cannot run a political party on that basis. You can't run any kind of party. You can't run anything. How about that? Now, you can get people to show up if you say, well, now, if you're going to join our organization, you're going to have to be here 3 days a week. You're going to have to dye your hair green. You're going to have to give us $20 every time you show up here. And you're going to have to quit trying to have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife. And according to whatever it is that they find the appeal to be in your club, whatever it is, people will do it. Or they'll try. They'll say they will. But if they show up and you say, well, the object of this club is so-and-so, and they say, well, that sounds agreeable, I'm interested in that. And they say, well, what's the requirements? What do I have to do? And they start talking about, just directly, there's nothing about that you got to quit doing anything behavioral. You have to change your behavior. They just bypass it and they immediately begin to talk about working on the mind. People will desert it. And I gave you more analyzation than was even necessary. They will simply turn and walk out. Their eyes will glaze over very shortly. And it does no good to ask them why, because they don't know why. Because what you're asking them to do is almost stop breathing. Now, this does not deny the fact, which all of you must know, that there are groups always been around, all the way from going under the banner of philosophy to some attempt to, at mind control, self-direction of one's mind. There's been things throughout history, and there's things going on now. So there are people who say that that's what they're involved with, but I assume you know that they're not. What you're asking people to do, if they truly understood, if they even got a hint of what you were saying, that the whole purpose of this, the whole idea of being of the freedom of the mind, or of a greater state of consciousness, or an enlightenment, that what it is totally beyond the realm of that cloud. It is outside of everything you think. Can't resist pointing this out right here. You could take some ordinary people could hear that, and they go, well, you're just coming up with another name for God. See, because if you'd put up for that, they'd think, well, you're talking about something that is indescribable, but it's God. You see that you're back to the impossible. You're back to that which no one can ever experience, and they'll accept that. But if you said no, if you were foolish enough to carry this on with my imaginary person, you said no, what's outside that cloud bank of human thinking, that thinking cloud, what's beyond that is not God. And if they say, well, what is it? And you say, well, it's nothing to be thought about. They go, well, that's God. Just admit it. No, that's not. And if you actually convince them that, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something else. I'm referring to something else, but it is beyond even the idea of God. There's nothing you can do with that. They could mark it down as being insanity. They could just... there's nothing you can do with it. They would stick around maybe if they say, well, now, all right, now I liked what you were saying up till now, but now what this thing you're talking about, go ahead, admit it's just God. Now, I'm not all that religious. I'm not a member of an organized religion, but you can call it something else, but you're talking about like the supreme power. And then if you'd go, oh, all right. As long as you would give them a name, as long as you would agree to a name, as long as you would agree to some describable principle, they might stick around. At least they would not doze off. They would not be absolutely thunderstruck mentally. It would not make their mind shake like a 29 Ford. But that's unfair. It's misleading. The seductive nature of what men think is so strong that the only proof you need is to try and stop it. It can't be plainer than that. It couldn't be blunter than that. It couldn't be more offensive. It couldn't get more in your face if it was your own reflection. People can talk about God, and they can talk about flying saucers, and they can talk about God. Geez, what I would give to find a secret work mystery monastery somewhere in Tibet. What they would know, what they could teach. All you got to do is to break the allure, break the seductive dance that you're now engaged with whatever it is you're thinking. Would you like to know what I'm thinking? Not necessary. Not necessary. All you've got to do to see the reality of this is stop it. I mean, just stop it for a couple of minutes, and then we'll talk about it. Notice I didn't bother to wear a watch. I don't have to keep time. Nobody's going to do it. Nobody can do it ordinarily. If they even make any attempt at it, all that seems to happen to them is that it's like holding your breath for a second. Then they won't say, well, wait a minute, maybe you should explain it again. No, just stop thought. Just stop it. Just do it a couple of minutes. We can do that. I mean, how long can you hold your breath? I mean, even a heavy smoker, a minute. Stop thought for a minute. Okay, let's do that, and then I'll get back and I'll explain it more. So here we go. I'm exaggerating for the sake of dramatics, but if an ordinary person gave it their best shot, all they're going to get is a momentary sensation, literally, about the best thing to describe it, It's like you held your breath for a second for some reason. You're really trying to think about something, or you got sort of excited. And you went, and it's like you can't stay there. You know you can't. You go. I mean, to begin with, it's not uncomfortable. You can surely do it. You can do it probably 30 or 40 seconds, even most ordinary people. You can go. What's the point? Plus, after a few seconds, it begins to get increasingly uncomfortable. To the point that if you're reasonable, you're finally going to go ahead and exhale and start back to the natural rhythmic process, because you know you have to. That is not an untoward comparison to people when they try, if they would even try. If they could get anywhere, if they could find some place to get one or two fingernails in that kind of crevice, and you say, well, just stop thought for a second. Just do it for 30, 40 seconds. Let's do it for a minute, and then I'll explain more. And if they in some way try it, all they get is, and then under most conditions, they can't really do it that long. It's almost like they can, if you looked at it like being a pool, and it kind of calmed down for a second, it was still for those 30 or 40 seconds, even if the surface of the mind sort of calmed down and nothing seemed to be happening. It was like constantly, it was like little darter fish out of the corner of your eye or under a rock somewhere, they go. And it's while the person's sort of holding their breath. It's just like things like, what? Huh? What? The ultimate point for this being that even if they did it, if they could do it for 10 or 15 seconds, they would find nothing other than comparable to holding your breath. They knew they could do that. It's unnatural. To start with, it's not uncomfortable. It's certainly possible. They do not see what's involved, even those that dream the most of awakening and enlightenment, and the liberation of the mind. They got no idea what it is. It seems so far removed. Might I point out, since I use breath as the great comparison, has any of you ever considered why the most common method, apparently, of so-called mystical schools and disciplines, the most common discipline, ritual of all, is always tied around breath? Specifically, the most common being that people are given the notion whether they're doing it in a sitting, meditating position, or if they just say in your everyday life what you should do, what you must do if you're going to follow this particular mystical course, this kind of the direction in which we have historically moved, is you must become continually aware of your own breath. That is so good. I wish I'd been around and thought of it. But the first mystic thought of it. It is beautiful. It's beautiful in a way, in fact, I've got to say another word about it. It is beautiful in a way that only that which is singular is beautiful. Because there is truly nothing else on a par with that. Well, except the real thing. But there's nothing on a describable physical par with attention to breath. Because you tell somebody, now you understand I've moved past the point of just talking to ordinary people. We're talking about those that actually believe that they're searching for the great mythical, mystical secret and truth and way and path and activity. And of course, like everyone else, first thing you want to do, if someone said, well, here it is, I'm in charge of it, here it is, it's the Ralph T. Waldo Modern School of Mysticism, and put up a little sign, they show up, and you talk a while, and they're impressed, they like the general things, and they ask you questions like, well, is this close to so-and-so? And you go, oh, yeah. So you got them going, and they say, well, what is it we do? He says, you must give attention to breath. We're living our lives in some sort of dream. You're not even aware of the fact that you are actually alive physically from second to second, from moment to moment. And then they start, which is good. Up until then, as I said, I wish I'd thought about it to make it just a metaphorical joke. Because here it is, something that you must do continually. It's with you all the time. You don't have to go to Tibet. You don't have to go anywhere. And here it is. And you're never aware of it. And so they can point out, you realize you breathe all the time? You go, well, yeah. You go, but are you aware of the fact that you are never aware of it? And of course, you're not until somebody points out, and you go, well, no, I'm not. They go, we've got to give attention to breath. But notice also, it never stops there publicly. Anything you ever heard, that's not the end of it. You'd want your money back if you went and bought a book. The Secret Mystical Rewards of Breath Control, or Attention to Breath. Attention to Breath and the Modern Mystic. And you pay your $19 and you buy the book. And it looks rather thin and slim, but you know. There's always going to be a modern, up-to-date thing, and it says what you should do. What a man truly trying to bring his own consciousness to some new, expanded level. What he must do in the beginning, is to become a continual observer of his own breath, of each breathing in and each breathing out. You turn the next page, and there is no next page. You want your money back. What is it you always hear after that? That is just a warm-up. What you hear after that is, as everyone expects, as everyone demands. It then goes in to insanity, to dream worlds, to gods. They then begin to describe why one should become continually attentive to one's own breathing. Which is, well, there's numerous descriptions, but then they start, it's because breath is our one single connection to the Godhead. And as we become attentive to it, we begin to take in this kind of cosmic prana, this kind of baccarat that comes from God himself. And it goes through the invisible wavelengths, and it infiltrates our lungs, which is close, of course, to the heart and the mystical soul. And it goes on and on and on, and about how we much enrich our breath, and that the more we give attention to breath, our lungs become more conscious. And then it kind of seeps over to the heart. That it just... You didn't like the one tonight, the father's advice as the boy went out to seek his own mystical master. He says, mystics with charts will break men's hearts. Yeah. It goes on, and there's nowhere to go on and on about. It should have stopped at the first page. It is the only thing, besides the real thing, besides the direct thing of just actually working on consciousness. This is not really important. I've said all I meant to, but I can't resist pointing out. Think about yourself. Once you understand that you have got to interfere, you have got to interrupt your lifetime belly to belly, eyeball to eyeball dance with the mystic cloud, with the thinking cloud, that is all that you are not individual, you are not a person, you have no singular personality, you have no individual voice. You have never used consciousness in the way it can be used. You've used it like it's supposed to be. You've used it as well as anyone else. But it's only when you try to interfere with it that you understand what this is about. So assuming that you've got that down, then I was going to just say as a little side trip, consider if it was up to you that you were now some great mystical teacher or trying to tell somebody that was interested, and you thought, well, what will I give them to do? To try and drag them out of the ordinary flow of life like everyone else, and to bring your attention, at least under some new control. What's the obvious thing? Now, at first you might think, well, I could pick out other physical things. You could say, all right, from now on, to be a mystical, to be part of the Ralph T., whatever I said, Waldo School of Mysticism, what you must do is have a continual awareness of your thumbs. No matter what else you do. Because you should be living a decent life. You should not be drinking and beating up women and children. You should not be stealing. But whatever you're doing, there's probably a few little rough corners in your life, such as I just mentioned, that you may have to straighten out. But above all, what a truly alert would-be mystic has got to do is at all times be conscious of your thumbs. Now you could do that, but it's rather static. And sometimes you could be involved, you'd be in the same shape as everybody else, like trying to remember the name of God with every breath. But if you took that seriously, you'd be times like you'd be walking around in your pockets, and maybe it was that one time a day that you were going to remember your great mystical aim and go, oh, I'm supposed to remember my thumbs, be aware of them. and you want to pull them out, you don't want to move them, or maybe you're busy working, you're trying to turn a bolt on there, pull out your transmission, you suddenly think, you look at your thumb, your hand slips, and you break a knuckle. It could prove unprofitable in certain regards all the way around. And you could think of other things. But think about breathing. Now, of course, the other things going on, your heartbeat, the circulatory system, but there is one thing that is right up front that all you got to do is just give it a momentary, just a slight attention, and it's the one physical function. You know, gestures, we got them, the thumbs move, but there's one thing always going on: breathing. I just wanted to brag on the people that first came up with that. Because I said, it's not, when you see it, you think of it. There is nothing else good. Then you can think, well, that's not such a big deal, because that's really all you got to work with. That's what made a big deal. Nobody else would see it. The rest of them were praying to tree gods and frogs and the seasons, trying to become more conscious, trying to become more insightful and understanding. At any rate, breath has been the most commonly used one in the mystical traditions, and even, as many of you know, in certain of the mainstream religions. They have under specific conditions where breath is supposed to be a part of some ritual, that you're supposed to breathe in a certain way. At any rate, it has no mystical significance in the sense that it itself is a pathway to something else. It was just the second stage. It was a second order of telling people that what you've got to work on. There is but one mystical path, and that's your mind. That is what you laughingly now refer to as your own consciousness. And that is almost impossible to start people there. And so the breath. But your mind is breathing. Your mind is breathing in the same kind, not a dissimilar tempo, once you see it, as breathing. It's the thing that I've tried to represent with my low dramatics that everyone does, that you look off and you think. And you do the similar thing internally, but externally you can see it oftentimes with people going. And it's not dissimilar to it's just like, but if you tell people right off the bat that that's what you're working on, it's almost impossible, no matter how sincere they believe they are, it's almost impossible to get anyone going. I've already pointed out the stages most likely of impossibility. It's almost impossible to ever get anyone going if you do not give them something specifically to do, and especially some don'ts. Don't you people ever come back here with dirty thumbnails. No. Nobody can ever show back up here if you ever drink anything that has cola in it. You got to give people something, almost. But then if you went directly from that and you bypass that and you start on this, it's almost impossible for a person to start there. So I just point out that the breathing, which is usually tied to meditation when you get into the more obscure, the more apparently mystical aspects of the general spiritual tradition, that they generally then try to tie it to some form of meditation, and they don't know exactly what to make out of that. They finally have to come up with something. If you're a Buddhist, you meditate on Buddha. If you're a Christian, you meditate on Jesus. That you're supposed to be meditating on something. Whereas if they knew what they were doing, what the whole point of meditation, if you know what it is, they got it ass backwards as always. The whole point of meditating is to do nothing. The real meditation is the suspension of thought. It is at least the interruption of thought. Because if there's anything that's not meditating, it's to meditate on the great face of Muhammad, to meditate on the great words of Lao. Anything, if you say the purpose of meditation is to, well, you're out of luck then. It doesn't matter after that what you put in. It'd be like saying you should be conscious of your breath, of every breath. And people go, you know, like, what's the rest of it? That'd be like saying, well, the ground. Yeah. The ground. Yeah. You should be aware of your breath. Each and every breath you take should be within your own full awareness. Anybody's waiting, For why? And if you don't tell them why, think about yourself. You think, why should I do something? It has no reason. The breath, being the most popular, the most common, I just wanted to point out to you, is the same thing as telling someone that they should be attentive to their own consciousness. It's the exact same thing, except I say exact same thing. It's closer to blunt time. Because to pick out something such as to become aware of one's breath continually is like a second order of trying to be attentive to consciousness. Without being attentive to consciousness, without trying to interrupt what you think, you never see that it just flows. You never see that it operates just as mechanically, just as naturally, just as operationally as breathing does. Because if you told an ordinary person that if they became aware, that if they thought, if they just became aware of every breath, that they would be a better person for it. Would any sane person believe that? No. We ain't got time for you to think about it, plus it frightened me. Sometimes when I ask questions like that and I see some of you go, you're not supposed to think about it. If you told an ordinary person that being aware of their breath would enhance their breathing, would they believe it? No, because it's not true, for one reason. But it's not true. If you told somebody the same way, that if they became aware of their thinking, that would improve it, would they believe it? They go, there is no background of having those words from the correct source in the general thinking cloud of having those words put together in that way. To say to become conscious of your own consciousness, to become cognizant of your own thinking, to become a witness to your own mental life is salubrious. Can't be. Nobody's ever heard that. Plus they can try it for a second. They go, is that all the tape? That was all the tape.